Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to our second edition of Breaking News for this Thursday, the 27th day of March, 2025. And war footing is front and center on our first four headlines today. First, we see Iran has given its response to Trump's letter calling for talks. And we hear from Iran, no direct talks with the United States will take place. Now, three war footing headlines from Russia. Russia threatens Britain and France with bloodbath warning as Ukraine support talks kick off in Paris. Vladimir Putin, in another headline, is threatening an Arctic war as tensions grow ahead of U.S. President J.D. Vance's visit to Greenland. And Russia's Vladimir Putin launches a nuclear power submarine with special hypersonic weapons. Bill Gates, another headline, says AI will replace doctors, teachers within 10 years and claims humans won't be needed for most things. And finally, the Education Department of the United States, which is now being defunded and gotten rid of, funded remixing textbooks to advance pseudoscience and gender theory. This is not new news, but the breadth of the evil is now being revealed of what they did these last 4 years. All right, let's look at the headlines. Headline number one, Iran gives response to Trump letter calling for talks. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araqchi has given Iran's response to U.S. President Donald Trump's letter calling for negotiations on Iran's nuclear weapons program. Iran state news agency IRNA reported that the response was delivered through Oman and states that Iran refuses to negotiate under pressure from the U.S., but would be willing to engage in indirect talks. Now, this is a typical Iranian ploy stalling for time. With the planes moving to Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, it seems like from the U.S. perspective, the time for talking may be over. And also, we'll follow up on our story we did this morning about Diego Garcia. That's an island, again, a stopping off point there in the Indian Ocean, British owned, that is used for planes to attack in the Middle East if necessary. 3 weeks ago, I asked our Iranian friend Nader about a potential attack on Iran. Now, what did he tell me? He reminded me this today. He said, when you see the planes flying to Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, then you know the attack is imminent. So we'll see. So that's what they're doing right now. Now, three Russian stories all having to do with war. Headline number two, Russia threatens Britain and France with bloodbath warning as Ukraine support talks kick off in Paris. Coalition of the Willing leaders are meeting in Paris to discuss supporting Ukraine, but Moscow continues its bid to undermine these attempts, accusing France and Britain of provoking direct military confrontation between NATO and the Russian Federation. Governments of over 30 nations and entities are represented at the Coalition of the Willing, so-called talks in Paris on Thursday, called to discuss sustaining military and economic support for Ukraine. Also on the table is the suggestion of security guarantees for Ukraine, and even as frequently discussed by the UK and France, the possibility of European peacekeepers in Ukraine to monitor any agreement achieved by the Trump talks. The purpose of this is to deter in order to send the message to Putin that this is a deal that is going to be defended, Britain's Keir Starmer said today. Now, Russia, meanwhile, which would clearly not benefit from a ceasefire being guaranteed by NATO troops on Ukrainian soil and consequently a nuclear tripwire for any future bids to extend the territorial holdings in the country, has long agitated against such notions. That process continued this morning with the spokesman for the Russian Foreign Ministry, Maria Zakharova, warning of bloody violence if Europe tries this and accuses the UK of trying to inveigle Europe into an Anglo-Saxon plot to fight Russia against their own interest. Zakharova said, "We understand why they are doing this. They need to provoke Europe into a bloodbath with Russia. They themselves, London, let me remind you, left the European Union at one time. And now the golden dream, after they have disrupted the economy of the European Union, is to push together the European continent as a whole, and they will join the Anglo-Saxon coalition." Now, that there is an Anglo-Saxon conspiracy theory to destroy Russia. It's a frequent Kremlin trope. In other comments, the foreign affairs representative also said, "I'd like to note again that Russia resolutely opposes a scenario fraught with direct military confrontation between Russia and NATO." Further bids to undermine European confidence in the safety of supporting Ukraine came from Russian Member of Parliament Sergei Myronov, whose comments were amplified by Kremlin media on Thursday. He enunciated, and get this, a hypothetical situation where the weapons now being handed to Kiev may one day find their way back to Europe in the hands of terrorists. In other words, you give them to Ukraine, the war gets over, what's going to happen? Ukraine's going to sell them back to the terrorists in Europe. He said the West has been flooding Ukraine with weapons, and EU countries are willing to do so, even to the detriment of their own security. So this idea that the European nations are behind Ukraine and this ceasefire agreement, and then will even help out with troops on the ground, boots on the ground to support it, is not going over big with Russia. And again, Russia giving more threats. Well, speaking of threats, let's look at headline number 3. Vladimir Putin is threatening an Arctic war as tensions grow ahead of U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance's visit to Greenland. He said Russia will station more military personnel in the Arctic, and his country would defend its interest in the region amid Donald Trump's push to take control of the autonomous Danish island. We are talking about serious plans on the American side with regard to Greenland. These plans have long-standing historical roots. Putin told us at an Arctic forum in the northern city of Murmansk. This may surprise some only at first glance, said the Kremlin dictator, who seeks the Trump's backing for his own claims on Ukrainian territory. It's a profound mistake to believe that these are some kind of extravagant talks of the new American administration. He said it's nothing of the sort. Here's the worry. Putin said Russia is worried about NATO countries in general are increasingly designating the far north, which is, of course, Greenland, as a springboard for possible conflicts, with Russia monitoring the situation and preparing for an appropriate response. It's obvious that the role and importance of the Arctic, both for Russia and the whole world, is growing. But unfortunately, geopolitical competition, the struggle for positions in this region, is also intensifying, he added. Okay, this comes as a backdrop. Now, J.D. Vance is set to visit Greenland with his wife Usha on Friday, tomorrow, making him the most senior U.S. official to visit the territory amidst the growing war of words following threats from Donald Trump to take the island over. We will see what happens. Now, our last headline with Vladimir Putin's saber rattling. Get this one. Russia's Putin launches nuclear power submarine. This is a Reuters story. On Thursday, late Thursday night, Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, launched a nuclear power submarine equipped with hypersonic Zircon missiles capable of traveling at several times the speed of sound. Russian news agencies, referring to a video link from the Arctic port of Murmansk, said Putin launched the vessel named Perm, P-E-R-M, after a city in the Urals with the order, "I hereby authorize." The Russian agencies, quoting documents associated with the launch, said the Perm is the first nuclear-powered submarine to be equipped with Zircon missiles as a standard feature. So talk about the saber rattling ramping up here, getting hot, not only in Iran for them, but also with Russia and Ukraine. We'll see what takes place. Headline number 5. Now we're going to switch gears here. Bill Gates says AI, or artificial intelligence, is going to replace doctors, teachers within 10 years, and claims humans won't be needed for most things. He predicted that advancements in artificial intelligence would significantly reduce humanity's role in many traditional tasks, such as medicine and education, and the seismic shift could happen in less than 10 years. During an interview, the Microsoft co-founder described a future where humans are no longer necessary for most things because AI technology will readily perform tasks that currently require specialized human skills. Today, expertise in fields such as medicine and education remain rare, Gates said, adding that those areas depend upon a great doctor or a great teacher. But over the next decade, great medical advice and great tutoring will become free and commonplace, Gates says. He further elaborated on his vision of a new era, which he terms free intelligence, in a conversation last month with Arthur Brooks, a Harvard professor known for his research on happiness. AI technology will increasingly permeate daily life, revolutionizing areas from healthcare and diagnosis to education, with AI tutors becoming broadly available, the mogul predicted. It's very profound and even a little bit scary because it's happening very quickly and there is no upper bound, Gates told Brooks. Now, there's considerable debate about the future roles humans will play in an AI-driven society. While some analysts suggest AI will primarily help humankind to become more productive and potentially create new economic opportunities and employment, others express concern about job stability. Now, job stability isn't the real problem with AI. The real problem concerns people turning to AI for the final answers on any questions they may have. In other words, AI will become the last word concerning whatever it is asked about, and that is the real worry. In other words, you want the answer to a question, just dial up our official AI, and that gives you the last word. Case in point, let's look at headline number 6, how all this works together. Education Department funded remixing textbooks to advance pseudoscience and gender theory. The Education Department this is from the US, of course, spent millions on remixing textbooks in order to advance their far left social agenda. It's no secret that the Biden administration did everything it could to use the Department of Education to advance its left-wing worldview, but with the agency's hopefully impending dissolution, it's worth reviewing the exact flavor of evil it's been involved with in its sowing. Now, an organization called Open the Books has released a snapshot of a forthcoming, more exhaustive report on waste, fraud, and abuse from the Department of Education. The millions spent on indoctrinating children show that the department has not just been a place where bureaucrats dictate education to states from an ivory tower or collude with teachers' unions to the detriment of American students and families, but more malevolently, it's been a money laundering scheme for Democrats to fund far left social theories to fundamentally destroy American family and civil life. That's exactly what the left is attempting to do. Everyone understands that essential protections for all students must be preserved somewhere in the federal purview. This is one of their statements. Well, Open the Book CEO John Hart told the Federalist, once we get past that conversation, it hardly takes 5 minutes to find examples of tax dollars being spent to inject progressive dogma into the classroom. It's not limited to universities. We find it at public secondary schools as well. It's a misuse of public funds intending to have lasting impact on a generation of students. From 2021 to 2024, the Department of Education awarded $1.3 million to fund a project at Framingham State University called Remixing Textbooks Through an Equity-Focused Lens, or ROTEL. The project covered a wide swath of pseudoscience and indoctrination and ultimately published the information in an open source textbook. Now get this, each book naturally begins with a, quote, land acknowledgement, a tedious process of falsely claiming Native American ownerships over American land, stating that the indigenous people are the traditional stewards of the land. And so it goes. Now, fortunately, Donald Trump is dissolving the Department of Education, forcing the states and local school districts to make their own decisions on what goes into the minds of the students. Now, yesterday we did a story on censorship from the Federalist. That's where this story comes from. Here's the headline. Censorship. Amazon's AI calls conservative book about leftist indoctrination of kids biased and extreme. In other words, the book they put out, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts that the Federalist did about the indoctrination of kids in school is called Biased and Extreme. By who? By AI. When you ask AI about this book, it's biased and extreme. Why? Because it's not left-wing nonsense and indoctrination. Incredible. So a lot of fascinating stories this edition of Breaking News, as we always have. We'll keep an eye on Diego Garcia, what's going on there with Iran, and keep you posted on all that. I'm Don Stewart. Thanks again for watching. Until next time, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless.